Hello and welcome to The Explainer. You know, every once in a while you come across a story that's so perfectly planned, so flawlessly executed, that it's more than just a story. It's a masterclass. And that's exactly what we have for you today.
Just listen to that. That raw, explosive, just completely unhinged outburst. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? The kind of line a villain spits out right before everything comes crashing down around him. But this wasn't a movie script. This was real. It was a real quote spoken by a real boss who had absolutely no idea he was being recorded by a tiny, hidden spy pen. He had no clue that in that moment, he was sealing his own fate. See, he thought he was at the climax of his own power trip, the moment where he'd finally broken his target. But what was really happening? He was walking directly into a perfectly laid, legally sound trap. So, welcome to The Explainer, where we dig into some of the most unbelievable stories you can find. And today, we're doing a really special deep dive. A full, long-form journey into a saga of workplace revenge that is, and I'm not exaggerating here, nothing short of legendary. This isn't just about someone getting even. This is a masterclass in strategy, in patience, and in the beautiful, intricate art of malicious compliance. We are going to break down step by step how one employee, armed with pretty much just a hidden recorder and an ironclad contract, took apart a toxic management structure, brought down a bully, and walked away with a full year's salary for all his trouble. So you're going to want to get comfortable for this one, because this isn't just a story, it's an epic.
All right, let's take a look at the blueprint for this perfect revenge. Our story really unfolds in 6 distinct acts, kind of like a play. First up, in A System That Worked, we're going to see the calm before the storm, this fragile but totally functional office harmony. Then, in The New Sheriff, we'll see how just one new person can come in and shatter that peace. Act 3, Death by a Thousand Cuts. Well, that's where the tension really builds. A slow, grinding campaign of workplace abuse. But then we get to the turning point in The Compliance Gambit, where our hero decides to stop taking it and start fighting back, not with anger, but with the rules themselves. All of this leads to the huge climax in Judgment Day, where the trap is finally sprung. And of course, we'll finish up by savoring the aftermath in The Price of Tyranny.
You know, every great drama seems to start with this period of calm, right? A delicate peace that's just waiting to be shattered. And our story begins in a place you would never expect to find this much intrigue. A small, pretty unassuming plumbing company. I want you to picture the scene. A modest little office. You've got that constant low-level hum of phones ringing, the crackle of radios as technicians check in from the field. This company, they offered services 6 days a week, plus all the emergency calls after hours and on weekends. It was a high-pressure gig, you know, where a burst pipe at 2 in the morning was just another Tuesday. And the whole operation, this entire complex dance of scheduling plumbers all across the city, it all hinged on just 3 people in the dispatch office. And for a couple of years, against all odds, this place wasn't just working, it was a seriously well-oiled machine.
So, this slide right here, this really gets to the core of why everything worked so well. It was this delicate ecosystem of different personalities and needs. First, you had our narrator, the anonymous original poster, or OP, who shared this whole story. He was in his 30s, single, no kids, and his defining trait, flexibility. He was basically the shock absorber for the whole office, the one guy who could pick up the slack, the glue holding the chaotic schedule together. Then you had Howard. OP affectionately described him as older than dirt, and Howard was the bedrock. He had this rigid, completely non-negotiable Monday to Thursday schedule because he was caring for his elderly parents. You could absolutely set your watch by him. And finally, there was Smashley, a single mom juggling 3 young kids. Her life was a total whirlwind of doctor's appointments, parent-teacher conferences, and all the childhood emergencies you can imagine, which meant she was often late or had to leave early. I mean, if you look at that on paper, it sounds like a manager's worst nightmare, a total recipe for disaster. But in reality, it was a symphony of mutual support. See, OP's flexibility was the perfect counterbalance to Smashley's chaotic schedule. If one of her kids got sick, OP would cover her shift without a second thought, because he knew she'd do her best to make up for it whenever she could. And Howard's unwavering presence, well, that provided this solid foundation during the busiest parts of the week. No matter what kind of chaos erupted on a Friday, they knew Howard had Monday through Thursday totally locked down. They were all good at their jobs, and more importantly, they trusted each other. They had each other's backs. It was a system built not on rigid corporate rules, but on genuine human understanding. A fragile piece that, as we're about to see, could be completely shattered by a single stone tossed into the pond.
And this slide maps out the exact moment the gears of that well-oiled machine started to grind to a halt. The whole thing started to unravel because of Smashley. She began a relationship with one of the plumbers, which on its own wasn't really the issue. The real problem was that part of her job was to process and submit all the technicians' timesheets to the head office for payroll. So a few weeks go by, and an accountant over at the main office starts noticing something weird. One particular technician was consistently logging way more overtime than anyone else. It was a huge red flag. An internal investigation kicks off, and it really doesn't take long to discover that Smashley was padding her boyfriend's hours, just adding time he hadn't actually worked. But it didn't stop there. The second, and way more damning piece of evidence came from a customer. They called in to ask about a warranty on some work, but when the office looked them up, there was no record of the job anywhere in their system. The customer insisted, saying the tech was definitely there and that the lady on the phone had offered a 20% discount if they paid in cash. And that was the smoking gun. Management cross-referenced the truck's GPS records for that day with the official job logs. The GPS showed the truck was right at the customer's address for 2 hours, but the official schedule showed it was between jobs. They were running a cash side hustle on company time with company equipment. Both of them were immediately fired for cause, and just like that, the 3-person team was down to 2. The perfect, fragile balance was gone, creating a vacuum of chaos and, of course, a job opening.
So with Smashley gone, the office is basically in crisis mode. I mean, they're down a third of their dispatch team, and the workload is just becoming totally overwhelming. The company needed to hire a replacement, and they needed to do it fast. The person they chose, well, that person was going to define the entire future of that office. And who did they hire? Well, in a classic textbook tale of nepotism, they hired the owner's son. For the rest of the story, we're going to use the nickname OP gave him, SOB, an acronym that, as you're about to see, is fitting in more ways than one. SOB didn't come in as a trainee or even a junior dispatcher. No, he was installed as the new office manager, the new sheriff, and he walked in with this swaggering, desperate need to prove himself. From day one, his management style was this toxic cocktail of micromanagement and totally unearned arrogance. He treated OP and Howard, the 2 experienced guys who had literally kept the business afloat, not as colleagues but as subjects to be ruled. He walked around with this air of superiority, questioning every single decision they made, criticizing processes that had worked perfectly for years, and just talking down to them like they were children. The friendly, cooperative atmosphere of the office, it didn't just fade away, it evaporated overnight. It was replaced by this thick, suffocating tension. Every phone call felt like it was being monitored. Every dispatch was second-guessed. The storm had well and truly arrived.
Okay, we're now entering the real heart of the conflict. And this isn't about just one bad day at the office. No, this is a slow, grinding campaign of psychological warfare. This is where we see a manager's petty insecurities and his power trips escalate into a full-blown pattern of abuse. It wasn't one big, dramatic event. It was a series of these small, calculated injustices, a death by 1,000 cuts, and each and every one of them was designed to wear down our OP's spirit, to make him feel powerless, and let's be honest, to ultimately force him to quit so SOB could bring in his own team. For weeks, he endured it. He bottled it all up. But with every single slight, every injustice, this deep well of resentment was filling up, drop by drop. And that well of resentment, it would eventually become the fuel for one of the most meticulous revenge plots we have ever come across.
Let's just walk through this timeline of abuse, because every single one of these cuts is a crucial piece of the puzzle. It started, as it so often does, with money. One day, OP worked right through his lunch break to handle an emergency call. This was something he'd done countless times before. No big deal. But on his next paycheck, he noticed his pay was short. SOB had docked him for that time, claiming he was under orders to reduce overtime. Now, this was blatantly illegal. OP worked the time, he was owed the pay. When OP calmly pointed this out, did SOB apologize or fix the mistake? Of course not. He escalated. As a petty little show of power, he started ordering OP to take his mandatory lunch break just 3 hours into his 8-hour shift, right in the middle of the morning rush. It made zero sense for the business. It was purely designed to disrupt OP's workflow and assert dominance. Then it got worse, the vacations. OP was feeling seriously burned out, and he was contractually entitled to 3 weeks of paid vacation. So he puts in a request for a week off, well in advance. Denied. No reason given, just no. Thinking maybe it was just a bad week, he waits a while and submits another request for a totally different set of dates. Denied. Again. It was becoming crystal clear. This wasn't about staffing or managing a business. This was personal. This was a systematic campaign to control, to demean, and to harass OP until he finally broke.
This slide just puts the whole conflict into stark black and white. On the left, you have the simple, clear reality of OP's legal and contractual rights. He had a right to be paid for every single hour he worked. He had a signed contract that spelled out his hours. He was entitled to 3 weeks of vacation, and according to provincial labor law, he was legally guaranteed at least 1 day off in every 7. I mean, these aren't suggestions, these are the rules. Now, look at the right. This was the reality of working under SOB. He was expected to work during his unpaid breaks.
His schedule could be changed at a moment's notice, contract be damned. His vacation was just perpetually, inexplicably denied, and he was told he had to be available to work whenever SOB demanded, even if that meant working 7, 8, or more days in a row. This is the crucial point, right here. This wasn't a personality clash. It wasn't a simple workplace disagreement. SOB wasn't just a bad boss. He was actively and repeatedly breaking the law and violating a legally binding contract. And every single time he did it, he was unknowingly handing OP another piece of ammunition for the war that was about to come.
And right here, finally, we get the turning point. After weeks of this relentless abuse, something inside OP just snapped. The phase of quiet endurance was over. The phase of strategic revenge was about to begin. He came to this critical realization, you know what? Fighting OSOB head-on is a losing battle. A screaming match with the owner's son is a fight you just can't win. But what if he didn't fight him? What if he used OSOB's own rules, his own demands for rigid structure, against him? What if he fought him with the very letter of the law and the contract that OSOB was so casually ignoring? Now that was a different game entirely. So OP's first move was a really smart one. He reached out to an old high school friend, a guy named Eric, who had become a lawyer. Over a casual Sunday night dinner of wings and beer, OP laid out the whole ugly story. The docked pay, the forced breaks, the denied vacations, all of it. As OP later wrote, and I love this line, it's amazing the amount of advice you can get for a few pieces of chicken and some beer. Eric listened patiently, and by the end of that meal, OP wasn't just venting anymore. He was armed. He had a foundational understanding of his rights, of contract law, of labor law, and most importantly, he had the beginnings of a truly brilliant plan.
The very next day, acting on his lawyer's advice, OP drove across town to a spy shop. And there, he bought his secret weapon, a digital voice recorder, perfectly disguised as a simple, everyday pen. This was the masterstroke. This tiny, innocuous little device, just sitting innocently in a shirt pocket, it changed everything. It signaled a fundamental shift in OP's entire approach. He was no longer just a victim of abuse, he was now an intelligence operative, methodically gathering evidence. From this moment on, every rant, every threat, every illegal demand SOB made was about to be captured, stored, and preserved as a permanent, undeniable record. The game had just fundamentally changed.
Okay, so this slide right here, this defines the brilliant core of OP's entire strategy: malicious compliance. This wasn't about being insubordinate, it was the exact opposite. It's the art of following orders and rules so perfectly, so literally, that it completely exposes the absurdity of those rules and creates chaos for the person who made them. OP was about to follow his contract to the absolute letter, and he just knew it would drive SOB completely insane. So his first act of compliance was a masterclass in corporate judo. He composed a polite professional email to SOB. In it, he stated that, effective immediately, he was withdrawing his verbal consent to the flexible schedule they'd all been using for years, and he would be reverting to the hours explicitly laid out in his original signed contract, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. That's it. No more weekends, no more late nights. Well, SOB fired back an angry, demanding email, and this is where OP made his first genius move. He hit reply all, looping in the head of HR and the company owner. In his calm, professional response, he simply stated that he was adhering to the terms of his legally binding contract. A whole flurry of emails followed. SOB would send these furious, unprofessional demands, and OP would just calmly and politely reply, citing the contract and copying HR and the owner every single time. He was creating a perfect, undeniable paper trail of his own professionalism and SOB's escalating rage.
And this slide, this just captures the strategy in glorious action. The conflict came to a boiling point the following weekend, all over a Sunday shift. SOB demanded OP come into work. OP calmly refused, citing the provincial labor law that legally guarantees 1 day off in every 7. Since he had worked the previous Sunday and every single day in between, he was legally entitled to have this Sunday off. The implication was immediate and absolutely horrifying for SOB. If OP didn't work, he would have to cover the shift. And suddenly the bully turned into a beggar. He pleaded with OP, saying, "But my kid has a soccer tournament on Sunday. Can't you just bend the rules this one time?" I mean, the irony was just breathtaking. OP simply looked at him and used SOB's own logic right back at him. "Sorry, but we have to follow the letter of the law." The rage that erupted from SOB was biblical. He screamed, he swore, he called OP every name in the book. And all the while, that small, silent spy pen in OP's shirt pocket was just drinking in every single glorious, incriminating word.
And now we arrive at Judgment Day, the climax of the entire story. Every carefully worded email,
Every documented slight, every secretly recorded tirade has been leading to this exact moment. OP has weathered the storm, he has meticulously gathered his evidence, and he has set the chessboard. All that's left is for the king to make his final fatal move. The trap is about to be sprung. So the Monday after that whole Sunday shift debacle, OP gets called into a meeting. In the room are the owner, the head of HR, and a very smug-looking SOB. The owner and HR, they look concerned. They explain that they've been getting some very troubling reports from SOB that OP was being insubordinate, that he was refusing to work and threatening to abandon his post. You see, SOB was there to deliver the final blow, to paint OP as the problem employee and get him fired. But OP was prepared. He remained completely calm, and just methodically, he laid out his side of the story. He explained the illegal pay docking, the forced break times, the perpetually denied vacations. And for every single point he made, he referred them back to the long chain of emails that he had so diligently copied them on for weeks. And suddenly, the narrative that SOB had been spinning just began to completely unravel before their very eyes.
And then, after laying out his entire case with perfect calm, OP delivered the checkmate move. He looked the owner and HR directly in the eye and said, with absolutely no room for negotiation, "You need to discuss this soon because I am taking the last 3 weeks of December as my vacation time." It was like waving a red flag at a raging bull. SOB completely lost control. Right there, in front of his own father and the head of HR, he leaped to his feet and just exploded with this exact quote. It was a torrent of pure, undiluted rage. A perfect, witnessed, undeniable display of his unhinged and abusive nature. It was more than OP could have ever hoped for. While SOB was still red-faced and sputtering, OP calmly turned back to the stunned owner and HR. He pointed out that by law and by his contract, he was entitled to 3 weeks of vacation. He reminded them he had only taken 2 days off the entire year and had been formally denied twice. And then he delivered the final devastating blow. He pointed out the staggering hypocrisy of SOB denying his legally entitled vacation when SOB himself, after only being with the company for 3 months, was currently planning his own family trip to Florida. The room just fell into a dead, shocked silence. The trap had been sprung, and the tyrant was well and truly caught. After the meeting, SOB corners OP, blaming him for ruining his family's trip to Disney World. But OP was done talking. As SOB was in the middle of his rant, OP's phone rang. He answered it, put it on speaker, and a calm, professional voice filled the air. It was his lawyer, Eric. "Hey, SOB, recognize my voice?" he asked. "This call is being placed from our law firm's conference room. The next call we're making is to the owner to get his lawyer's name." OP said the look on SOB's face was worth a year's salary all on its own. The game was over.
This whole thing led to one final formal meeting. Picture a conference room. On one side of the table, the owner, the head of HR, a pale and completely silent SOB, and their high-priced corporate lawyer. On the other side, OP and his friend, the lawyer, Eric. The mood was unbelievably tense. Eric began, calmly laying out the clear-cut case for constructive dismissal, harassment, and creating a hostile work environment. He opened the floor to discuss a settlement. He presented the mountain of emails, the meticulously documented timeline of harassment, and then, for the grand finale, Eric introduced the piece de resistance, a carefully edited supercut of audio recordings, all captured by OP's innocent-looking little spy pen.
Eric hits play, and the conference room was just filled with the sound of SOB's own voice, screaming threats and profanity. All the greatest hits were there. The quote from the very top of the show, the vacation denial tirade, every single abusive and demeaning word he had ever hurled at OP, all stitched together into this undeniable symphony of his own tyranny. The effect was immediate and it was devastating. OP said SOB's face went ghost white. The owner didn't even look at OP or the lawyer. He just stared at his son, his expression a mask of cold, silent fury. He didn't have to say a word. The recording said it all. Their lawyer, looking pretty shaken, asked for a moment to confer. When they came back, they made an initial offer. 3 months severance in exchange for signing a waiver. It was a lowball offer, a standard tactic. Eric just smiled. He then played one final recording. It was from that post-meeting rant where SOB had explicitly promised to give OP a bad reference to any future employer, an act of blacklisting that is highly illegal. Eric calmly mentioned that he and 2 of his colleagues had witnessed that specific threat over the speakerphone. Checkmate. There was nowhere left for them to run.
After another brief, really tense recess, the company's lawyer came back into the room. The fight was just gone from their eyes. They came back with their final offer. No more negotiation. They would pay OP 1 full year of his salary, tax-free, paid out in a single lump sum. He would receive a neutral reference, and of course, they would require him to sign a non-disclosure agreement. There was no formal admission of wrongdoing, but let's be real, the number on that check spoke volumes. OP had won. He had endured weeks of abuse, played the game with the precision of a chess grandmaster, and had come out on top in the most spectacular way you can imagine.
But the story does not end with that settlement check. Victory is sweet, sure, but the most satisfying kind of revenge has a long, lingering aftertaste. For OP, the price of SOB's tyranny wasn't just a year's salary. No, it was the opportunity to deliver one final, devastating blow to the company that had stood by and allowed it all to happen in the first place. So, what did OP do with his year of paid vacation? He didn't just sit on a beach somewhere. No, he put his unique skills to work. He knew this plumbing business inside and out. He knew their biggest clients, their pricing structure, their best technicians, everything. And he happily took a consulting job with the company's direct competitors, sharing everything he knew. So while SOB and his father were paying OP's salary for an entire year, OP was actively helping their rivals take their customers and their profits. It was the ultimate, poetic revenge, getting paid by your enemy to help their competition dismantle their entire business.
So, after all that, what are the practical lessons we can actually take away from this incredible story? Well, first, know your rights. OP's entire strategy was built on the foundation of his contract and the local labor laws, so read yours. Knowledge is power. Second, document everything. The email chain OP created was the absolute backbone of his legal case. A paper trail is irrefutable. Third, malicious compliance can be an incredibly powerful tool. By following the rules to the letter, OP exposed his boss's hypocrisy and his incompetence without ever breaking a single rule himself. And finally, stay calm. Throughout this entire ordeal, OP was the picture of professionalism, which only made SOB's rage-filled outbursts look even more unhinged. He proved that in a battle of wills, composure is your greatest shield.
You know, it's also worth looking at the perspective from the Reddit community where this story was originally shared. A user named Selfless Gene made a really crucial point that kind of broadens the whole story. It's easy to just cast SOB as the sole villain of this piece. But what about the owner? What about the head of HR? This commenter argues that the leadership is far from innocent here. They allowed this to happen. They almost certainly knew their son was a problem, a walking liability, and yet they did nothing about it until their hand was forced by the threat of a lawsuit. They enabled the tyranny, which, in the eyes of many, makes them just as guilty.
And that powerful question is where we're going to leave it today. Because this story is so much more than just a satisfying tale of revenge. It's a powerful case study in corporate culture and the nature of accountability. Is the abusive manager the only problem here? Or is the deeper failure with the leadership, with the entire system that allows that kind of behavior to fester and grow completely unchecked? It forces us to think about the true cost of nepotism and the ultimate responsibility of those at the very top. Because when a system allows a tyrant to rise, it's the entire system that's accountable for the damage that follows.